Hello everyone, and welcome to AuditNet's Training Without Travel Webinars, IDEA Software Training via Practical Application, presented jointly by AuditNet and Richard Cascarino and Associates. Today's webinar is Basic Script Writing in IDEA. My name is Jim Kaplan, founder and owner of AuditNet, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's presenter and subject matter expert is Richard Cascarino, principal of Richard Cascarino and Associates. Let me have Richard introduce himself and give you a brief overview of his background, and then I'll cover the housekeeping items, disclaimer, and important information about the AuditNet IDEA partnership. Richard?
Thanks, Jim. Welcome to the webinar. For those of you who've been with us through the full series, I apologize. You can go to sleep for the next minute. For those of you who are just joining us, my name, as Jim said, is Richard Cascarino. I'm the principal of Richard Cascarino and Associates based out of Steamboat Springs in Colorado. I'm currently broadcasting to you from South Africa. I'll be returning back to Steamboat tomorrow. My background, I have some 30 years experience in IT audit training and consultancy. I'm a past president of the Institute of Internal Auditors in South Africa, a member of ISACA, the ACFE, and the IIA, and I'm the author of 3 books on internal auditing, an integrated approach, Auditor's Guide to IT Auditing, and Corporate Fraud and Internal Control, a framework for prevention. Let me hand you back to Jim so that he can take you through the housekeeping.
Thank you, Richard, and we're glad to have you with us today. I'll go through the housekeeping items fairly quickly. You received the slides this morning, which has the information, so I'm not going to read from the slides, but we are recording today's webinar, and you will receive a link to the recording that should be sent out by tomorrow. Also, because we're operating under NASBA rules, we are required to ask polling questions. You must answer all of the polling questions in order to receive CPE. If you're joining us from a mobile device, a tablet, or a laptop, you may not be able to respond to the polls, in which case you will have to accumulate all the answers and send them to us in a single email. After the webinar is over, we'll record them and you will receive your CPE. CPE certificates will be sent out after the final webinar this week, so they won't be sent out until Friday. You can submit questions via the chat box. All you have to do is enter your question, hit the submit button, and I will be moderating those questions and pass them along to Richard at an appropriate time, either when we're breaking for a polling question or at the end of the webinar. The next slide provides information about the disclaimers. I'm not going to read the disclaimers. I would like to share with you, however, the information about the AuditNet IDEA partnership. AuditNet has entered into an agreement to provide access to subscriber content to IDEA Premium supported users. If you're currently a Premium supported IDEA user, you can access the AuditNet content at no cost. For more information, please go to the AuditNet site for details on how to log in and access more than 2,300 templates. There is information on that link on the supplemental slide that will be shown at the end of the webinar, which you have in your handouts. So at this point, I'd like to turn the floor back to Richard to get into today's topic of IDEA basic scripting. Richard?
Thanks, Jim. As Jim said, this is the basic scripting webinar. There are 2 further webinars, webinars 11 and 12 in the series, which are the advanced scripting ones. This is taking us through the basics of what scripts are, how they work, the value of automating it, how to record, create and edit macros with IdeaScript. This particular webinar is not going to teach you Visual Basic or IDEA Basic. We go into some of that in the advanced webinars, but this will show you how to actually use IdeaScript and also how to learn and document best practices for script development. So what we're going to do is we'll kick off by starting up IDEA, picking up the whole setup, and I'll jump over into IDEA so that you can work along with me. So we're going to take a look at putting together a script. This will be a first try to script. So we're going to pick up a file. Now, as with any other file, we go into our home and we go into our desktop to pick up a file. And the file that we're going to pick up, in this case, we'll just take a nice easy one. We'll pick up from Microsoft Access. We shall pick up the from the tutorial project, and we'll pick up our customer database. As with previous ones, you can see that we only have the one database under our customer, so I'm going to say, okay, I'll pick it up. Now that I've picked the thing up, what can I do with it? Well, I'm going to do some analysis. So I'll go into Analyze, and I'm going to do some summarization. For those of you who've been here the whole series, this should take you back several webinars. But we'll go into summarization. And we want to summarize the customer database by country, accumulating credit limits. Hopefully you will remember how to do that. Just in case you don't, we're going to summarize by country. We could say then by something else, then by something else. In this case, we only want it by country, so I'll say use quick summarization, and it blanks out all the then bys. The total I want to accumulate is my credit limits. And I'm going to create a database called summarization. And I'll say OK. So there's my summarization. Okay. Nothing complicated so far. We've done all of this before. And as with what we've done before, we can see that if we look at the number of records for Argentina, 12, if I click on that 12, it will show me which 12. I could print it or I could save it. In this case, I'm happy. Now, let's take a look at how we got here. We're in the summarization. I'm going to go across to the properties on the right-hand side and click on History. And you can see there, I'm on Customer 2 database. You should be on Customer database or Customer 1. I'm on Customer 2 because I've done this 3 times now. If I click on the plus, there's my Access Import. If I click on the plus there, that's what I did. Okay, so you can see there, at this date and this time in South Africa, we imported from that particular database. The table name was database 1, the number of records were 341, and the bit below it is my IDEA script code. Okay, my IDEA script code. Now if I close that down, underneath it there's my summarization. If I click on the plus there, there's what I did. And you can see there, number of records 33 that were extracted, no control totals, I didn't ask for any. The summarization came from that database, there's the number of records, and below it again is the IDEA script code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the code for the summarization and I'm going to highlight it. I'm just going to click on it and highlight it. Okay, and you can see it says set database equals client open database, and there's the name of the database. Set task to DB summarization. Use quick summarization was true. Summarize by country. adding up credit limits. The database name was going to be summarization.imd. Task output database name is dbname. Create percentages, I didn't ask for that. Create statistics to include my summarize statistics. Go perform the task. Then shut everything down. And that's what I've done. So what I can do now is I can right click in there. And I can say copy the idea script, or copy all idea script. I'm going to say copy all. And you can see it's now put me into the script editor. Okay, we were looking at the history. We are now in the script editor. And you can see there, up at the top, it says new script.iss, sub main down to end sub. First thing it does is say call access import, which is down here, function access import. Then it says call summarization, which is down there, function summarization. Okay, so what this little program is saying is, in that my main program, first thing I do, call that subroutine and go and open up the file. Having done that, go into the next subroutine and perform the analysis and end it. Okay, everyone with me so far, I hope. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and save it. I'll go into my file, save as, and we're going to call this one first try. And save it. Once I've done that, I will close down that script, and I will close down my summarization file, and I'll go into my customer 2 data and delete it. It says I can't delete it because it's open. Once again, that's IDEA trying to protect you from itself. Because it's already open in my work area, I cannot delete it until I've closed it down. Now I can delete it, and it says, do I wish to delete it? Yes. I have a child database, summarization. Do I wish to delete that? Yes. Okay. So we've created the script and we've now deleted it. And that brings us to our first question. So I shall open up polling question number 1 and launch it. And you'll see that it says idea script can be recorded, copied, written from scratch, or all of the above. Please vote now. Now what we just did was copying it. Give it a couple of more seconds. Remember, you don't have to get the answer right, but if you want the NASBA CPE, you have to answer it. If you're on a tablet, then don't forget to send it in. We have 100% voted, so I will close that and share the results. And we've got 100% say all of the above. Obviously, I'm making these questions too easy. Okay. So let me close that down. And we'll go back to where we were. So you've done your first macro. You've written your first macro. Let's try running it. So we'll go up to where it says macros, and we'll open it up. And we want to run a macro. So if we click on run, it says which one. Well, we've only got one, so we'll use first try. And there it's created my customer database, and it's created my summarization. And if I look at the history, there's my text that I used for accessing import in my script, and there's my script for summarization. So you've now done your first script. You created it by copying, and you've run it, and it's duplicated what you've done before. Now that's the kind of thing you can do if you, for example, let's say you're doing this analysis and you want to see a summarization by country of all transactions or customers or whatever, with showing all the credit limits in total. And next month you want to do another one to see if it's the same. The files may have changed, but as long as the file names remain the same, in other words, as long as the customer is still called by the same customer database, then we can still simply go back in and run the script again, and it will pick up next month's and repeat the exercise. So let's take a look at IdeaScript and see how it all works. If I click on the IdeaScript window, you can see I'm now sitting in the IdeaScript window, and I've got a whole pile of buttons that are now active. First thing is a new. I can use that to create a new IdeaScript. I can open an existing IdeaScript. I can save an existing IdeaScript. I can print. Now, some auditors like to print the IdeaScript and save it as part of the working papers. I tend to work with electronic working papers. Therefore, the IdeaScript, the history is always there. So I can always get back to the IdeaScript and see what's there and why it was there. One of the ones that's blanked out at the moment is to cut the selection and put it on the clipboard. There is no selection there. If I selected that, it would light up and I could say cut. Now there's nothing there to cut other than sub main, end sub. Copy, same thing, I can copy it to the clipboard. Paste, I can insert it. So I can take a piece out of one script and copy it and insert it into another script. So I don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. If I have standard outputs that I want to do or standard file definitions, I can pick up just that part of the script and stick it into here. Okay. I can also find, quite a useful one, to find a specific string in the Windows editor. It's all right if you're simply doing a small script the way we're doing at the moment. But if you have multiple reports coming out of multiple files within one big script that you run on a monthly basis, and you want to add something to it, it's handy to be able to run through perhaps several hundred lines of script and just find the bit that you want and jump in and fix it. Find next will find it. If it's not the one you want, it will find the next one. Makes sense. Replace. Replaces the string found with another string. And if you get it wrong, you can always undo it. You can also redo it, and you can work with bookmarks. You can insert a bookmark in your script so that as the script grows, as you build it up, you can say this is the bit that I want to change on a monthly basis. The rest stays the same, but this bit I may change over the course of the year. Bookmark it. I can then move on to the next bookmark, to the next bookmark. I can go back to the previous one, or I can delete all of the bookmarks. Step into. Now, step into is a nice technique that allows you to step into a subroutine in order to debug it line by line. If I look at debug, you see I've got all of these breakpoints. Now, I haven't set the breakpoints, but if I had set them, I could then go in and say, okay, between that breakpoint and that breakpoint, do that instruction, do that instruction, do that instruction, one instruction at a time. The common reason for doing that is if you've made a mistake. Somewhere you've ended up with the wrong total, you've ended up with the wrong file, it's in the script somewhere but you can't find where. Then you can single step the script and see step by step by step what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. You can also do a quick watch by looking at a particular variable. So I can step into, I can step over, or I can do a quick watch. When I'm running it, I can say, I think the problem seems to be on that customer number. So as I'm single stepping it, show me a watch window and show me the value of that customer as I go through it, one at a time. Ah, there's where it went wrong. And I can pick it up from there. And obviously help, very useful, displays the IdeaScript help. Okay, now that's IdeaScript. You'll see if I close that window, I'm not going to save changes. You'll see we also have VisualScript. If I click on that one, that will allow me to go into Visual Basic Script Editor. And from in here, I can open databases, close databases, delete, etc. I can import to the desktop. I can export the active database. I can change the order, define the fields, etc. All of the things that effectively I've done down here, I could actually write BasicScript for. But BasicScript is simply a list of the available commands as part of the BASIC language, Microsoft BASIC, for controlling the flow of logic, for defining, and these are idea scripts. But again, if I go back into my IdeaScript editor and I open up my existing script, first try, and you can see there's a new script and there's first try.script. I can now copy bits of this into new script, or I can take new script and close it. And that leaves me back at my first try again. Now from up here, I can save it. I can build this as an executable file. If I build that as an executable file, then I can hand it over to someone who does not have IDEA and say at the end of the month, I want you to run this firsttry.exe. I can also go in and edit it the same as I normally would, debug it, format it, change alignings. I can send new dialogues. We'll look at dialogues a bit later. We can change the fonts, etc. Now you'll see there are certain colors lit up. Okay, and when we have those lit up, there's our subroutines. That's what we're calling, and that's the parameter we're giving it. There's my task, and that's the parameter I'm giving it. There's my input file name, and that's the parameter I'm giving it. So all of these colors can help you find your way around the document. Okay, there's my maximum character length, and there's a variable that I put in there. As I was saying on our visual script, these are all of the standard visual basics. So you'll see that that looks very like what's coming up when we do analysis. There's my direct analysis. But if I take that direct analysis, I've got to tell it which file first. If I go into Open Database, I can pick my database. Now we're in the customer database, so I'll pick customer and say OK. And it's jumping me across into there. There's my project step, open the database. But this is in Visual Basic. Now from Visual Basic, and if I have programs that are written already by someone else in Visual Basic, I can then convert that into IdeaScript. Now I can't do it at the moment because I haven't completed the database. So I can remove that and close that down in the meantime. So you've got some choices. You can go from Visual Basic into IdeaScript. You can go and take the information and move it around within Visual Basic. And that brings us to our second polling question. Which I will launch and share with you. Second question, IdeaScript is written in Visual Basic, Visual C, Pascal, C++. Please vote now. Okay, we've got quite a few people voted, but still one or two left to vote. Remember, you don't vote, you don't get the CPE. Not our decision, NASBA's decision. Got another couple of seconds. And I will close the poll. And share the results. And once again, it's all written in Visual C. So let me hide those results. And we'll go back into the presentation screens. So, as I said, IdeaScript is an object-oriented programming language. Now, what does object-oriented mean? It means you can write little parts and pull them up, and they will access objects. And it's consistent with Microsoft's Visual Basic for Application, VBA. Okay? The idea is that the script language itself consists of objects and things you can do with objects. So public methods and things about objects, the properties. Now from our perspective, writing IdeaScript, Most objects can be seen simply as tasks that can analyze and manipulate the database. But the database itself, as well as the structure of the fields within the database, as well as the structure of the record within the database, they're all classed as objects for IdeaScript. Okay, and I was going to say unfortunately, it's not unfortunate at all. Fortunately, the programming conventions must be obeyed. Okay, you have to follow the rules, otherwise it's going to give you what is known technically as unpredictable results. In other words, you're looking at something and you really have no idea what you're looking at. So what do we end up with? IdeaScript you'll also find referred to as macros. And a macro is simply a series of commands and actions that you can hide away, and then when you need to perform that task, you just call it back in and run it. Now, we started off by taking a series of idea tasks and executing them. We then looked at the history. So we recorded a series of tasks, and then we can either copy in from the history, or we can copy in from a script that someone else has done or that you did last year. Or if you want to do it the hard way, you can type it in to the editor. Now, having written your script, you can then compile it into an executable file. As you're all aware, I'm sure, we start off with source code, the bit that the programmer has written. We then compile it into executable code, and we take it from the source code into binary, because the computer can only work in binary. But it also binds it to a whole pile of variables. In a mainframe, it would be the equivalent of link editing it into various libraries, so that any other auditor or accountant can simply run that script without opening IDEA, without even having IDEA on their machine. So, what do we have? This code that's in front of you, we're not going to do it because we don't have a payroll master file, but this code that you can see would set the object, and the object is DB. How do we know? Because we've defined it. DB as an object. Okay? And we've defined it as the open database payrollmaster.ind. Okay? So my database is an object, and then down here I'm saying set the database equal client open database underline, and that's the name of it. Okay? I'm then going to set the object called record set as being the record set from that database. So set rs equal to db. Up here, remember we said db was our payroll master file. db.recordset, and then I'm going to set the active record rec as being the object rs. So we'll set rs there, and we'll set re equal to rs active record. Okay, so that's how we open up a file, by accessing the objects which we define, okay, using dim statements. Now, when you're doing object-oriented programming, the method that we use for behavior or action is then performed by what's referred to as a class. So we've set the object DB as the database, and they then want to close the database. So there's my dim DB as object, set DB equal to that, and then close the database. So the syntax to run something is in the form of object.method. Okay, so there's my object database dot, and there's my method close. Okay, happy so far? So we've looked at objects, we've looked at public methods. Let's take a look at properties. A property is an attribute or characteristic of an object. What does that mean? Well, I can set different descriptions about that object. For example, in that object that we've got, the property description can then be applied to the object database. Okay, so there's my opening of my submain, and what it's telling me is that this coding is going to going to return to the screen the property description out of the payroll database and display it in a message box. Okay, so that's simply narrative. What am I going to do? Well, there's my database defined as an object. I've set the database equal to that name, and that's where it is. My description is going to equal database description. And then I'm going to create a message box that will pop up on the screen and will show me the description. And that's the end of that subroutine. Okay. And the syntax, again, in this case, is in the form object.property. So we had object.method. Now we've got object.property. Okay. What can we do in Visual Basic? We can do the standards, we can do addition, division, equations, exponentials, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. We can do modulus, multiplications, negation, or not equal to. These are all operators that we can do on the objects that we have selected. Okay. So let's take a look at our third question. Third polling question says, the IDEA script button, which allows you to move quickly between several code locations in one or more modules, is find, toggle bookmark, set bookmark, or find next. Once again, please vote now. It's a slightly sneaky question because there's one key word in it. We have most of the votes in, still a few people left. Okay, I will close it. Remember, you don't have to get it right, you just have to get it. Closing it down now and sharing the results. And we have a split vote between toggling bookmarks and finding next. The key word is quickly. Yes, you can jump around using find next, find next, find next. But if you want to jump right to a specific spot that you are interested in, then you want to go straight in and toggle to that bookmark. Okay. Let me close down the poll and we'll go back into IDEA. Okay, so we've done a straightforward summarization. I'm going to close down those two files. And I might decide I want to record a brand new macro from square one. So on my macro bar, there's my record macro. If I click that, you'll see up at the top the record macro button is now open. So from now on, everything I do is going to be created into a macro. So again, I could go into my home desktop. I'll go back into my access, go back in to my tutorial, pick up my customer database again. Go into my analysis, do my summarization, quick summarization, on customer, nope, by country. Accumulating my credit limits. I'm going to output this time to summarization 1. OK. And I'm still recording that macro. Okay. If I click now, it will stop creating the macro. Now it asks me what kind of macro do I wish to create, Visual Script or IDEA Script. Now if you're a visual programmer, if you're a Visual Basic programmer, then by all means use this as an easy way to get some Visual Script which you can then go edit to your heart's content. Why would you want to edit it in the first place? Well, let me give an example. This is not specifically IDEA. This happened to me way back in my early career. Using a program generating tool, generated a program to interrogate a particular file. When we ran the program, it took 10 minutes to run because it had looked at the database, it had looked at the data dictionary, it looked at the access path to data, and it had come up with a standard way of accessing the data. But it also generated source code. So I was able to go and look at the source code and say, hang on a second, there is a quicker way to access the data than that. Instead of going in through that route, change it to going through this route. Recompiled the program and it ran in 20 seconds. Okay, so there can come a time, if you are a programmer, where if you have something that's taken an inordinate amount of time, you might want to go into IDEA Script and generate it. In this case, I'm going to create Visual Script, and I'm going to make that my default option. It still gives me the choice, but when it tries to say which kind of macro, it will say Visual Script as the default. So there's my Visual Script editor. Okay. Now I can go in as a visual programmer and I can look in there. There's my customer database IMD. This is where I selected it. There's my summarization. That's how the summarization looked. I could go and change it. In fact, I'm happy with it. So now I could save that and run it as a visual script. But if I want to save it, I can only save it as visual script. If I want to save it as executable, I'm going to have to convert it to IDEA script, and it will not let you do it until you've run it. So I've run it. The file already exists. Do I wish to replace it? Yes. Now I can go and say File, Convert to IDEA Script. I'm going to call it second. and it's now saved it. I can now close my visual script. Don't particularly want that one again. And if I go and view my macros and I decide to open it, there's my second, and that's it saved as IdeaScript. Okay, so you can jump around it and move it about. Okay, so if you haven't tried it with me, let's try it now. I'll delete that one again because I keep ending up with more and more and more databases. To record the macro, we've got the record macro button. If you click on that, it starts it. I can now go in on my home, open it up, bring it in from my tutorial, but I'm going to have to bring in my Microsoft Access from my tutorial. Down there, I'm happy. Data analysis, summarization, quick summarization, by customer, summarizing my credit number, outputting it to summarization 1, done. And if I switch it off now, and that's one thing you'll find it's very easy to forget to switch off the macro, the recording of the macro. You can see it's now set for Visual Script. I'll switch it back to IdeaScript, and I want to make that my default object option. OK. And there's my new script again. And I can save it with whatever name I want. OK. Also supported, you'll find we've got a whole pile of dialogue controls. What is a dialogue control? Well, let me show you how dialogues work. We're not going to design a lot of dialogues in this exercise. We do that in the advanced one. But let's say, for argument's sake, here I'm going to use, I want it summarized by credit limit. I could say I want, instead of simply saying analyze it by credit limit, I want to choose the field that I want to total on. So I could go in here and say I want to insert a new dialogue. Now there's my new dialogue box. Okay. And from there you'll see I've got a whole pile of dialogue tools I can use. OK buttons, cancel buttons, buttons, radio buttons, check boxes, static text, etc. Group boxes, pull down, list, combo boxes, and so on. Okay, we pick that up in advanced scripting, but basically what I can do is I can say, okay, I want to put in, for argument's sake, I'm going to put in, let's say for argument's sake, I'm going to put an OK button in there. And you can see it says OK button, title OK, etc. I could put in, for example, some static text, and I'll put it in over here, and I'm going to say enter if OK. So let's put it in here, and it's come across here. I'm going to move that up here. And I'm going to move a cancel button here, and I'll put in another text box, and I'll say cancel if not OK. It's up here. When I press enter, it comes in, I can move that up to here. Okay. Now, in itself, that's fine. But what I now need to go in is I need to go back into my source code. And you'll see in here that I've now got a new dialog. But I still have to tell it what clicking on the OK means and what clicking on cancel means. And as I say, we're going to do that as part of our advanced scripting. Okay, so that comes into webinars 11 and 12. We're currently on webinar 9. Okay. So if that's what you can do, what can you not do? Well, you cannot, from within those macros, open, modify, or save views of data. You have to do that from within IDEA. You cannot do attribute planning and evaluation because that's interactive. You cannot do MUS planning and evaluation. You can't use the import assistant to create a record definition for importing a file. Okay. You cannot use the advanced record definition creation window in the import assistant. You can't put in notes. In other words, anything that you would normally expect to be interactive on the screen as you're doing it, you cannot put into a script. You have to do it interactively. Okay. Having said that, let's go back and have a look at the next polling question. And the next polling question, funnily enough, says, in IdeaScript it is not possible to classify data, extract data, join database, open and modify views. What can you not do? Most people have voted. Still a couple to go. And I'll close the poll and share the results. And as you can see, we're sitting 100% with open and modify views. The rest of it we can all do. So, Visual Script itself, this one up here, allows us to automate tasks that you perform repeatedly without having to be a programmer. And then, if you wish, you can convert Visual Script into IdeaScript. So I've just opened IdeaScript when I intended to open Visual Script. So let's take a look at writing and running a macro. I'm in a macro. I could go into Visual Script. In fact, I'm going to go into IdeaScript. No, I'm not going to go into Visual Script. I'm going to go into File, I'm going to open a database. It wants to know which one. I'll pick up customer. I'll pick up customer database. So there's my open customer database. Then I want to go and I want to categorize. So what do I want to do? I want to summarize. I'm going to summarize by customer number. I'll use quick summarization, accumulating the credit limit. This time you'll notice it's not put in a file name. Okay. So now I have to tell it what the file name is going to be. So this is going to be summarize. I'll call it summary because I've got multiple summarizes. I'll say OK. And it asks me, do I wish to run it? Now if I say no and try and save that, it won't let me save it. It will let me save it as Visual Script, but it won't let me save it as IdeaScript until I've run it. So I might as well run it now. So it ticks it, it's done that, it's completed without any errors. So now I can say I want to file and save as, or I can say I want to convert it to IdeaScript. In this case, I'm going to say, call it first, and this was written as Visual Basic, first VB, and I'll save that. Now although it was written as Visual Basic, it's not Visual Basic. If I try to open an existing Visual script, it's going to say there are no Visual Basic scripts because I didn't save it as a Visual Basic. I saved it as IdeaScript. Okay, I have a question coming. Thank you. Basically it's saying, Richard, you are an idiot, you forgot to hide the poll. So I will go back and do it again. My apologies. That was me being rather foolish. So I'll close that down. Let's go and do it again. What I did was I went into Visual Script. Let me just check what you're seeing. Fine. I went into Visual Script and I said what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into File and I want to open a database. Double click on it and it says which database. I'll take my customer database. So it now says open customer database. Fine. Then what do I want to do? Well, I've got all of these things I could do. I'm going to go in, I'm going to categorize. What do I want to categorize? I want to summarize. So I'll double click on summarize. And it takes me back into my summarization again. I'm going to say use quick summarization so it takes off the then by. I want to total my credit limits, but it doesn't tell me, it doesn't suggest a database name. So I'm going to give it a name, and I'll use the same one I did before, summary. You've not used that one before, although I have. So if I say OK now, it gives me a choice. Do I want to run the task now? If I say no, and then say File, Convert to IdeaScript, it tells me I cannot do it because it's not actually executed. It needs to execute completely and be sure that everything works before it will allow you to convert to IdeaScript. Okay, so the first thing I have to do is run it. Now it's telling me that somebody already exists. Do I want to replace it? Yes. So it gives me a green tick and a green tick, and it says at the bottom the visual script has completed without any errors. And given the fact that it's completed without any errors, I can now say File, I can save as, and I will save it as Visual Script, Visual first. But I can also say File, Convert to IdeaScript, and I'll call it First VB, because I created it originally in Visual Basic. Now I've already got it, so I've now wiped it out. So there's my visual script. If I close that down, I now have a choice. When I come to run this thing, I can say I want to run a macro. There's my visual first, which is a visual script, and there's my first VB, which was my IdeaScript version of my Visual Basic. So if I click on either of those, it will run it. I'll close it. If I open it simply, there's my first VB in IdeaScript, and that's exactly what we had before. Okay, but it's all one function now. Open the database, set the task to summarization, use quick summarization as true. I said I wanted that. Summarize by customer number. I did it by customer number instead of by, oh dear, that was foolish. So I don't want it by customer number, I want it by country. Now it's got a problem because it says, is country valid? Well, let me try running it and find out. Already exists, replace it, yes, and it's now done it by that. If I look at my IdeaScript, there's it by country. So I made a mistake when I did it originally, and I did it by, I can't remember what I did it by. What did I do it by? Well, I can always go and look. I'll save those changes, but if I open, there's my visual script. Now that's my first one that I've just saved, but that's the original Visual Basic. And the summarization, if I double click, I summarize by customer number. Even here, I can now change that to country and say OK. And if I try and save it, it will let me save it as a Visual Basic. It will not let me save it as IdeaScript until I've executed it again. But I don't need to because I've already changed it in IdeaScript. Okay. Happy. Stunned silence was a loud reply. Let's take a look at another polling question number 5. And I'll launch polling question number 5. Visual Basic, I'll try that again. Visual scripts can be used for creating macros which can be saved as IdeaScript, creating macros which cannot be saved as IdeaScript, running IDEA macros only, or all of the above. Please vote now. So your choices are, this is Visual Script up here, can be used for creating macros that can be saved as IdeaScript, for creating macros that cannot be saved as IdeaScript. Now right away that tells you D is wrong. Okay, it can't be, they can be used and they cannot be used. Or they can be saved and they cannot be saved. So one of them is going to be right. and running IDEA macros only. So sorry for those who said all of the above. It does become monotonous if you're not careful, that you automatically look at it and say, oh yeah, all of the above. But it's not. Still got a couple to vote. I'll close the poll and share the results. And the bulk of people said creating macros which can be saved as IDEA script. Yes, you can. Okay. As I said, it can't be all of the above because it cannot be A and B. It's either you can do it or you cannot do it, but you can't be both. And now I will hide the result. And we'll get back into the slides. Whew, got that one right. Okay, using scripts for continuous auditing. Okay, the whole concept of continuous auditing is built around the necessity and the ability to look for control deficiencies, to look for fraud, waste and abuse in large volume systems. Or if it's not a large volume system, in a system where instantaneous response is required. If you're talking in terms of fraud, you can do fraud in two basic ways. You can either steal a little so that it's below the limit of visibility. And you do that over and over and over and over again, and you bleed the people dry over a period of time. Okay? Now, that will not normally be picked up by detective controls, because each individual transaction which is running through those detective controls is below the level of materiality. The other option is you say hit once, hit big and run. Take the money and run. Now if you have adequate preventative controls, that should be picked up and blocked before it can actually happen. But the problem when you're dealing with a lot of small transactions which could fall below that level of materiality is that within your systems it's not going to pick it up. So we need something that's going to be consistently monitoring what's going on. And now you come into the big difference between continuous auditing and continuous monitoring. Okay? Now the nice thing about using something like IDEA is you could write a script to say show me anything that falls within those categories, and you can then hand it over to management and say we recommend that this be run in the background on an ongoing basis, or this be run on a weekly basis to identify patterns, or this be run, an analysis be run to look at missing invoices or duplicate check numbers or whatever, and we recommend that this be done on an ongoing basis. Or even here is an analysis looking at employees on the employee master file and comparing the names to a vendor master file. Or here are employees and we are comparing it to the current access records. Show me anyone who is on the access records who is not classified currently as an employee. We have done it once. We can go back into the history because management's going to say, that's very clever. Can you do that for me every month? No. But we will go back into the code. We'll copy the code into a macro. We'll save the macro as an executable program, hand it over to management and say, that's how to do it. We will come every month to make sure you are doing it. We are not the control. Continuous monitoring is a managerial function. Continuous auditing is our function. So we can ensure that the continuous controls are being run and are functioning still as intended. We can also use this kind of technique for continuous risk assessment. So we can look at how the computerized processes are being carried out. 2 plus 2 equals 4. But does it always equal 4? Well, we can set up monitoring that will run once a day, once every half hour, to check that calculations and computations are in fact still being processed correctly, that nobody's got to them or changed them. We can use this to develop an audit plan that runs across the whole organization, an enterprise-wide audit plan to match our enterprise risk management. Or we can simply use it to support individual audits as they're being carried out, or to follow up on audit recommendations. Okay, I've got a question. For continuous monitoring, how does executable file work? Assuming the business unit does not have an IDEA license, how will they be able to view the output records? Okay, well, let me show you. Let me go back into IDEA and let me go and pick up, well, helps if you get into IDEA. Let me go and open up that script, and I'll simply pick up first try. Okay, now that's the one that said open the document and run that function comparing that and produce that printout. Now at the moment that's all it's doing, it's simply running it on the screen. But I could then say print it out showing whatever. Okay, remember if I run that, I'm going to end up with that result, and I could say print. Okay, so once I've set that up, let's take it for argument's sake. There's my IDEA script. I'll close down that new script. No, I won't. I'll leave new script running. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take first try and I'm going to run it. It says it's a duplicate. Do I wish to replace it? Yes. File already exists. Do I wish to replace that? Yes. I can then go in and say, okay, take that one and print it. Now I'm not going to print it because you don't have printers, etc. Ah, what the hell, I'll print it. Okay, so it's now printed. I've said done. If I have a look at my IDEA script, there's my first try. If I look at new script, nothing has happened. Okay. Why did nothing happen? Because I wasn't recording it. But if I go back and now look at my history, there's my summarization. There's my IDEA script. And it's simply producing it to there. So I cannot do it at that level. What I would need to do is take that and go in. Let me go back into my data. And if I go in and say I want to record a macro, so I've set my macro running. I haven't. I've set it running now. And now I can say I want to take that information and I want to go and produce a report. How do we produce a report? Well, we can go in and say I want to print. I want to create a report. I want to use, we've done this all before. I want it by country, showing I'm not interested in the number of records. I'll take the country as the headings, etc. And if I say finish, do I want to preview it? Yes. There's my report. I'm going to say OK. In this case, I'm going to print it and switch off my macro. I want to create an IdeaScript macro, and there's my function. Call print database, etc. Now I can take that script and put it into that, and then I can say file, and I can say I want to save this whole thing as. Okay. I'm going to save that to new scripts, yes, and it's going to be P2, or no it's not, it's going to be first try, second try, third try, call it fourth try. Fourth try, save it. Fourth try 2. And now if I go in to my macros, I can open my macro and pick up, for example, fourth try 2. And that's the bit that said print. And I can say file, and I can say build fourth try 2.exe. Now, I could have put that all into one macro. If I had, then all I'm saying is save that, and I now have an executable program which is called, which I need to go and look for. But if I look for it, fourth try, whoops, fourth try 2.exe, and if I double click on it, you can't see it at your end, but it's printing here. You may be able to hear it print. I've got a question that says, would management need a copy of IDEA to run the executable? No. You're simply running executable code. And all that executable code is saying, in this case it's saying, run it from that file. Now that file doesn't have to be on the screen. That file simply exists, and it's saying print from that file. Okay. If I look at the IDEA script and I open that up, there's my fourth try, and it says call print database, print, set the database to summarization.imd, and run a print. Now that's been compiled into executable code, which will now say go and open up a file, not something on the screen, open up a client database called summarization.imd and do a database print. Okay, but it will do it as an executable program. So you don't have to have it. You don't have to have IDEA in order to on your machine in order to run this thing. You can hand it over, and you can use that to follow up audit's recommendations. Where you've made a recommendation and it's supposed to have been fixed, you can simply pick up that script and say, show me that it's working. Show me that whatever was wrong has now been fixed. As far as starting continuous auditing is concerned, where to start? Like anything else, like any other audit, you start off with what is it you're trying to achieve with this audit? Am I trying to prove that controls exist? Am I trying to prove that controls are functioning as intended? If I want to prove that the controls exist as at this particular point in time, then I'm going to use IDEA, and I'm just going to run IDEA. If I want to prove that at any random time in the future, the controls are continuing to exist. I can set it up as a macro. I can create an executable macro from it, hand it over to the management and say, you need to check that these controls are functioning as intended. And if it's high risk, that could be on a daily basis. If it's extremely high risk, that could be on an hourly basis. You can even set it to run in background mode. Now, as soon as you start to say continuous monitoring, continuous auditing, you're putting an overhead on the machine. Okay? It's going to take a lot more machine resources to run this thing on an ongoing basis. So you need to get executive approval. Otherwise, someone's going to say, this machine is running very slow. And it doesn't matter why it's running slow. They're going to turn around and say, it's because these bloody auditors are running this thing in the background and it takes forever, etc., etc. So you need that back guarantee that your back is covered at the top level. Before you get into heavy-duty auditing, ascertain the degree to which management is performing ongoing monitoring. Because if they are monitoring, all I want to see as an auditor is proof of that monitoring and see the degree to which they are monitoring. So how frequently and what are they monitoring? And if that is okay, then I'm gone. I don't need to do continuous auditing. So if they're partly doing it, then I may have to partly do continuous auditing. It's like two inverted triangles. The more management's doing at the top, the less we have to do. The less management's doing at the bottom, the more we have to do. Okay. So having decided that we're going to do it, then we select the appropriate technology solutions. It may not be IDEA. It's not the only product on the marketplace. It happens to be the one that I use. I do have other ones, but I tend to focus on IDEA rather than, for example, ACL. I've got ACL, but I just find it's easier to use the editors in IDEA. You don't have to use IDEA or ACL. You can go and write the code yourself in Visual Basic. Select the appropriate technology based on what you're trying to achieve and what your own skill levels are. Identify which files the information is going to be on and gain access to them. Okay? Get the permissions to go and access those files. You will find resistance because you're wanting to access potentially live data. You need to be able to convince IT, number one, you're not going to corrupt the live data, and number two, you know what you're doing with it. Okay? So you need to be able to identify where that information is, and that means that you have to understand what the business processes are, okay, and where the key controls are and where the risks are. You're not going to use continuous auditing or continuous monitoring to try and prove that every single control that's out there is functioning as intended. You want to know what are the key ones. Those are the ones that management should be focusing on. Here is my proof that management is focusing on it. Build the audit skill set. I tell people when you're using IDEA, play with it. Find out what it can do, find out what it can't do, find out how you make it work. For those of you who've been on the whole series, you've got the slides, you've got the files. If you can't remember, you can always go back and do it again. And just figure out what it is that you're trying to do and how to do it. Build that audit skill set and then manage and report the results. And we've already done reporting using IDEA. So we're looking today, in today's environment, particularly with things like big data out there and the use of the internet. We need to be able to access records giving digital evidence of transactions. The days when you can follow or when you could follow a paper audit trail, are gone. Okay, they don't exist anymore. Half the time the paper trail is discontinuous, so you've got a little bit at the start, a little bit at the end, and what goes on in the middle is guesswork on paper. I've seen it happen where an auditor, I went to do an audit in a particular organization, and it was medical insurance. Now, the way it was set up, they were using a package, and the package supplier had unrestricted access into their live systems in case they had to fix something. And that made me kind of nervous. So I said, listen, this thing is producing checks, yes? Yes. When the checks come out the end, how do you know that there was a valid transaction to start with? How do you know that somebody just didn't create one? This was picked up by our auditors 2 years ago. Right, and we take a statistically valid sample, because we've heard about statistical sampling. We take a statistically valid sample of the input documents and trace them to the output checks. Does anyone see a problem there? It's a totally valid technique, but what are you trying to prove? You are proving that for every input there is a valid output. My question is, for every check coming out, is there a valid input? So for 2 years they've been checking this thing back to front. They should have been taking a sample of the checks and going back to trace it to the input documents. So even with digital evidence, you've got to be sure that you're looking at the information the correct way based on what it is you want to know. How good is that digital evidence? The validity of it, the competence, the reliability of it, depends on the quality of the internal controls within your computer systems. So our whole audit process with modern computer systems has to move to a control risk orientation. So the audit is not simply an audit of the transactions. It's an audit on the adequacy and the effectiveness of the internal controls themselves. And what that's done is it's created an environment in which substantive testing has got far less importance. When we're doing continuous auditing, we're not trying to check every single transaction to make sure that 2 plus 2 does equal 4 in this transaction. We're auditing in order to ensure that the control which enforces 2 plus 2 equal 4 is continuing to work. Okay, so substantive testing, much less important as long as we can get to our confidence levels that we need. We talked about that on the webinar where we looked at stat sampling. The fact that you have a computer which is capable of looking at every single transaction does not mean from a continuous auditing perspective or from management, even from a continuous monitoring perspective, that that's desirable. If you're in a large volume system, if you are a bank, one of the big banks, and you're processing 5 million ATM transactions a day, the fact that the computer is processing 5 million and you have a digital audit trail of 5 million transactions does not mean to say that you want to go and look at all 5 million. That will double the size of the computer that you need to use as a bank. So our audit focus is reducing the need for substantive testing by testing the effectiveness of the internal control structures themselves. For example, if we're looking at key drivers for fraud, the major drivers for fraud are the laws and the regulations. Okay? What is stopping people committing fraud against your company? What is stopping your company from committing fraud against someone else? So that's a key driver for making sure that we have adequate compliance and prevention for fraud. Direct profit and loss impact. You have a fraud, it's going to hit you hard. How hard? Well, it depends on how big is the fraud. If it's a slow bleed over a period of time, it could still put you out of business ultimately. An indirect profit and loss impact to your business reputation, to your client retention, and to your acquisition of new clients. If word gets out that you have been hit with a fraud, and it doesn't matter how small the fraud was, the finger is going to be pointed. This company's governance has gone to hell. Oh, get your money out of that company. Don't deal with them. Don't be a client of theirs, etc. So what do we want from a continuous monitoring perspective for fraud and compliance? We want to detect fraudulent, unauthorized, or money laundering activities. There's a lot of significant penalties if your anti-money laundering is not up to scratch. And that means that your operational systems need to be monitored on an ongoing basis. One of the difficulties that you're faced with when you start getting into money laundering, etc., is in a conventional non-client based environment, one of the biggest controls that we have for preventing fraud is segregation of duties. A does certain things, B does other things, C checks them both. A cannot do what B can do, B cannot do what A can do, and C cannot do either. Theirs is simply a monitoring role. Now that's great in an office when I can look you in the eye and say you are A, Fred over there is B, and I am C, the monitor. But when you get into the digital age, who is A and who is B, and how do you know for a fact? You're now dealing with authentication of users, that you know for a fact that this person is who they claim to be and is entitled to do certain transactions, but not others. Person B is who they claim to be and is not doing things that they're not supposed to do. And person C, who's supposed to be doing the monitoring, does not have the capability of doing either A or B's work. So we need to be able to trace who these people are, what they're doing. And the assumption that you have to start with is, I don't know for a fact who any of these people are. So I have to assume that when someone says I am A, they might be B, or I am B, they might be A. So what detective controls do we have now? Not to check who the people are, but to check what is being done. And is what is being done valid? And the way we pick that up is by monitoring our activity and transaction logs, looking for patterns, looking for money transfer patterns, looking for low-value transaction patterns. If we have a corporate rule that says purchase orders over $5,000 must be authorized by a senior manager, look for a pattern of purchase orders at 4999. Okay. Use our Benford analysis to pick up numbering patterns which are abnormal. We looked at that when we looked at Benford's on one of the earlier webinars. We've all got the transaction logs, but every single system produces them in different formats. So we can use something like IDEA in order to pick up and create a centralized monitoring dashboard to give a clear view across our transactions and across our IT systems. For example, let's say for argument's sake employees may be using internet access for game playing and gambling. Now we did a test when we were running IDEA 6, the webinar IDEA 6. So we can pick up that file if I go in on my home and open up the file. The file was called access.txt. If you can remember that far back, it was a text file. So we can pick it up within our tutorial database, and down at the bottom we should find access.txt. Now to save us going through it and defining it all again, this is the one that we picked up when we were picking up print files. We created a definition file, and our definition file was called, or our template for it was called access.txt, but it wasn't coming in as a text file, it was actually coming in as a print report file. So I need to look for a print report file, and there is access.jpm. Next, I will generate field statistics, finish. So there's my file, and there's all of the information that I'm interested in. Okay. If I look at the history, there's my report reader information. I accessed it, I brought that in. That was how it was defined, and I sucked the thing in. So I can copy that and use that as a script. Okay. Simply by going in, right-clicking, and saying copy all the IDEA script, and there it is now. Now I can also insert in there anything else I want. I can create an IDEA script file and run it regularly. So I don't need to do it there. I can do it from here. There's my data, and now I can say, for argument's sake, I want to analyze, and I want to look for, I could do Benford's law, I could do statistics. I want to do a search and pick up, I want to summarize. And I'll summarize by the host name. I'll do a quick summarization. I want to pick it up in microseconds, but I want to add in there something that says if the name, the URL, is equal to. Now, here I've got a problem, because I don't want equal to. I want to pick up any URL that's got, for example, in there, what have we got? I want to pick up anyone who's doing searches. Well, let me close that down just now. And let me close that down. I'll move it over. And let's see what I could be interested in. There's my request type, there's my URLs, and I want to find anything which has got in it get agent, get whatever. There was an interesting one that I saw earlier. Robots. I saw one in here that said robots. So I could say that I want to do a summarization, summarize on host name by milliseconds if contained within that I've got a request type containing robots, but I don't just want a request type. I want to see if that request type anywhere in it contains robots. So what I can do is I can use these character functions. Okay? And I can say compare, I can compare with no case, I can find one of, I can look at just letters, I can look at all of these things. Now we'll look at these in the next webinar. Okay? But I can find anything that has that inside the expression. Okay? I can trim off various characters. I can look for it inside the expression. I can look for pattern matching of data and say if robot occurs within that, then highlight it. Once I've done all of that lot, then I can look at my history, and now in addition to access I would also have the inquiry that I set up, and I could take all of that script and create it as an executable file. Create it and then run it as and when I feel like doing it. And that brings us to our final polling question. And our the final polling question says, continuous auditing use of IdeaScript requires control objectives are predefined, thresholds exist for deviation rates, exception reporting is already in place, or understanding of the deviations sought. Please vote now. It's coming back to that bit that we said, if you're going to use IDEA, what is the first thing you have to know? And it's one of the biggest problems I find with auditors using cats. They take the cat and they dive straight into the computer. Still got a couple of more votes to come in. I'll close the poll. Don't forget, if you haven't voted because you're on the tablet or whatever, you can always send them in one email with all of the results. Okay. Two answers have taken domination. Control objectives are predefined and understanding the deviation sought. Remember what I said? The first thing you have to do if you're going to use cats to look for anything, you have to know what it is you're looking for. Otherwise, you don't have a hope in hell of ever seeing it when you find it. Okay. I'll hide that and we'll go back. I'm just watching to make sure you do go back. Helpful skills. Now this is not compulsory. You don't have to be able to do these things. You don't have to be a Visual Basics programmer. If you can and you understand how it's working, that helps. I've seen auditors who used IDEA as an introduction into Visual Basic programming. Once they understood the concepts and how it works, and we'll cover that in a lot more depth in 2 more of the webinars, then they can actually get into writing your own scripts from scratch. Quite honestly, with the power of something like IDEA, I don't know why you'd want to, but there may be things that you want to do that you figure you can't do in IDEA. So then, or you may just want to become a programmer. If you're going to use IDEA, ACL, Arbitus, Excel, any of the interrogation software, the generalized audit software, Know what it is that you want to know. You can spend hours spinning your wheels and you're having great fun interrogating it. But because you don't know what it is you want to know, you have no idea what is an abnormality, even if you see it. You have to be able to recognize what is abnormal. The first time I ever did an audit of an IBM mainframe operating system, it happened to be IBM's, at that time, MVS, which is now Xeos. And I started from the inside out with the parameter files, the sys1.parmlib. That directed me to which other parameter files, sys1.vtamlist, the kix tables, etc. The problem was, I'm looking for abnormalities. This is the first time I've done it. The whole damn thing looks abnormal, which means that you have to go through the manual for every single parameter. And literally, to do a mainframe audit at that level, it would take about 3 months. Nowadays, I can go through it probably in around about 10 days because I know what I'm looking for. I can recognize the abnormalities. You also have to have an insatiable curiosity. You cannot allow yourself to be put off with, well, it looks okay, it probably is okay. If the data is not in a format that you can actually make use of it now, you're going to have to change the data and keep digging. How do you change the data? Well, you change the data by using the advanced at functions. And that's what we're picking up on the next webinar, advanced at functions. And that brings us to the end of this one. We're slightly early for once. Are there any questions? Stunned silence was a loud reply. I've either put everyone to sleep.
I don't see any questions coming in, Richard.
That means that everyone's busy working away trying to figure out what the hell we were doing.
So this is probably a good time to just let everyone know that we have another session coming up on advanced at functions. But the key to using any software, and especially IDEA, is taking what you've learned and applying it. Go out and using it as soon as possible. Don't let it become shelfware. Don't let it become skills that you've taken a training class and then you haven't put it to use. Really, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to encourage all auditors to use data analytics and technology and apply it to every audit that they're working on. There are always ways that you can use data analytics, and you can use what Richard has covered today in terms of scripting, where you can show not only as a benefit to the audit function, but also as a benefit to management. So
I'm actually writing my next book at the moment, which is on audit use of data analytics.
Excellent.
Which is coming out by Orbach. I'm not sure when it's due for publication. I've got to get it to them by August. So after that it'll be coming out.
We're looking forward to that. Will that include scripts?
It will include scripts, and it will include, again, access to the demo version of IDEA, where you can download it and try it out.
Great.
Now,
Great.
It's not the only product on the market. There are other ones on the market. It's one of the better ones on the market. Personally, I would say it's, from my perspective, the best on the market. People who use ACL will tell you theirs is the best on the market, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them. I keep getting asked which is better, IDEA or ACL, and the answer is which one can you get the most out of?
it also depends a lot on which one you've been trained on, and also which
Correct.
one your organization has chosen to adopt.
If you know ACL backwards, you will get a lot out of ACL. If you know IDEA backwards, you'll get a lot out of IDEA.
And
if you've heard of them both, you won't get much out of either.
Yeah, and if you don't know either one of them, then I would suggest getting started with just an Excel add-in, something like either teammate analytics or active data, something that that works with a tool that you're all familiar with, Excel. And then you can start applying data analytic techniques, and at some point you can move up to the next level in terms of a full-blown data analytic software, and then you can start doing your scripting and basically working on that. So I want to thank you, Richard, for a great session today. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them now. We have a few minutes left, and we'll keep the line open. So any questions that you have on IDEA and data analytics, please do ask them. There's the supplemental information. The slide is up there now. The link to the Introduction to AuditNet for IDEA users. That is a short video under 10 minutes that basically explains how you can use AuditNet as an IDEA user, and how you can access all of the content. So,
the next webinar in this series will be on Friday, not Thursday.
Yes.
Just to remind you of that, because I will be arriving in Colorado on Thursday night, and I don't get in till 10:30.
Okay, well, that's great.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Richard, and thanks to everyone for joining us today, and we wish you a great rest of the day. And I know, Richard, you're in the evening now, getting ready to call it a day, but you'll be on the road heading back to the U.S., to Colorado tomorrow, and hopefully the weather will cooperate with you, and we look forward to joining you on Friday for the next session on using advanced app functions. So everyone have a great day.
I hope it doesn't cooperate too much, because I want to get some skiing in.
Ah, yes, and Aidan reminded us that today is St. Patrick's Day, so...
And the top of the milk to you all.
Top of the milk, and everybody should wear green today. Okay.
I'm quarter Irish, so...
And the rest Scotch, right?
No. Quarter Scottish, quarter Irish, and half Italian.
Okay, well, have a great day, everyone. We look forward to you joining us again. Bye.
Okay, bye.